Words are so strong. I've been now for a few days blessed with a laryngitis. So I'd like to share with you the lessons I've learned from my laryngitis. I know it sounds a little crazy. What is a rabbi sharing? We know that in Hasidus, the emphasis is doing what's called inner work. To be a pnimi. To be a pnimi literally means that you are invested in what you're doing. The experience that you are having is not somebody else's experience or for someone else, but rather a very deep moment of bonding, of connecting to what you are doing. Now, there are what we call the levushe hanefesh, the garments of the soul. What are they? What expresses the soul? So we have thought, we have speech, and we have action. Action is the furthest away from the soul, even though it accomplishes what the soul needs to accomplish. Speech is a little closer, but still is for the outside. Thought is the closest garment to the soul. And because it's the closest garment to the soul, therefore, it's the one that lives with the soul. When one cannot speak, the capacity to do things for outside, to say things for outside, is much more limited. And in that sense, a person can do one or two things to express himself: action, or a part of action can be writing. But writing is very associated to thought more than speech, because speech sometimes can just be a channel through which you just let the flow of your thoughts speak without really thinking. You let it happen. And you could not think deeply while you're speaking. So, in that sense, having the capacity of speaking diminished is an invitation to become a greater pnimi, to become somebody that's going to experience things at a personal level. When you're a speaker or an educator, you have that big, big problem. Why? Because at the end of the day, whatever you study, you usually study to give it over. You don't study it for yourself, for your own personal connection. So, in that sense, you have in mind the student. And when you have in mind the student, that is going to cause you to somewhere dilute the essence, the substance that you need to give to the students. On the other hand, when you are not able to communicate and you're studying it for yourself and you're thinking about it for yourself, and at the moment, the capacity is much greater because you're essentially transforming yourself through that study, through that thought process, without necessarily expressing it to somebody else. It says concerning the sun and the moon, everybody knows about them. But the verse says, Beli nishma kolam, without their voice ever being expressed, because they are essentially there. So, being essentially present is the gift that silence gives you. You suddenly have to think about the words that you're going to say. Will they be impactful? Not so much will they be impactful, but why am I saying them if they're not going to be impactful, if they're not necessary? The words themselves, instead of being long words and big philosophies, suddenly need to be reduced to essence. So it needs to be thought through. So you can understand that something that is processed with more care, more attention, more investment is completely a different product. Because then you're not speaking what the other one wants to hear, but you're rather speaking your inner voice. It's your inner voice that is being expressed by your mouth. It's not your mouth just pulling ideas in order to make things flow together. And in that sense, we can understand what the Rebbe says. An answer that the Rebbe gives to someone who wanted to start fasting. He said, when I was a young man, I did a lot of nonsense and I sinned in many ways. And I would like to start fasting in order to atone for what I did. And the Rebbe writes to him an incredible letter in which he says that, first of all, fasting is not the way of the Baal Shem Tov. The body has to be healthy. I would like to add a parenthesis to that, that fasting is a little fooling yourself because it doesn't help you change. It just makes you a good feeling that maybe you atoned for something, when really you did not change. The Rebbe is actually giving an invitation to this young man to change. So he tells him, number one, don't harm your body. Number two, it is known, the halacha, the law, that a person that fasts is basically diminishing his physical capacity, or he's making his nerves a little more sensitive. And therefore, if he's a teacher, he's not going to be able to teach properly. And then the students are not going to benefit. And if he's an employee, well, he's going to be stealing from his boss because he will not be able to work at full capacity. The Rebbe invites this young man instead to fast. Fast not of food, but fast of words. And to stay silent for a certain period of time. And the Rebbe mentions the great advantages there are. First of all, the Rebbe describes how a sin actually occurs. I have a tremendous drive inside of me that's a burning, and I don't let that drive stay inside of me, but I brought it into action. I brought it out I manifested that drive, that burning drive into action. So the Rebbe makes a comparison to how you kosher a pot. What happens to a pot which was put on the fire and you cooked something in that pot? With the fire and the heat, the pot actually absorbed the non-kosher food. How do you need to kosherize it? By burning, by using that fire, burning, using a blowtorch, source of heat that's hot enough to be able to extract and cleanse and burn away what was there. So the Rebbe says, when you don't speak, when you have a desire to speak, and it's burning inside of you, that fire cleanses what you did. It kosherizes your inside, your innards. That's where you have to really cleanse everything. Besides that, the Rebbe says there's another benefit. The person that you would normally have hurt with your words, he will not hurt because you'll be quiet at that moment. So it's not so much having long periods of time where you're silent, but being silent at a moment that you want to speak. And then the Rebbe said, there's even a greater advantage in being silent. Because at the moment that you want to say something mean or answer back, and you don't, at that moment, only Hashem knows. And therefore, you're doing it for the sake of God and no one else. And therefore, you cannot have ego from this. So in a sense, silencing ourselves sometimes, taking the time to silence not only the mind, but silence the mouth, and just sit, write, think things through before you express them. Stop living for who is going to listen to you and start listening to your inner voice. I think that's the invitation that Hashem is giving me in this period of time. Of course, it's painful, it's difficult, but it's a lesson that we have to learn in order to live things at a much deeper level. Be present, be yourself, think things through. Don't take your voice for granted. And make things matter. Give value to something. Don't just let it be said. So many words are said that have no value. So empty words. Hasidim used to say that the elder Hasidim, those who were pious, used to speak very little, think very much, and do much more. And then you can understand that the word and the action are much more potent. I always wondered how with 2 words the Rabbi was able to change, and is able to change so many lives and transform a whole world. 2 words at a time. Sometimes a 30-second encounter by dollars could be a life-changing experience because the Rabbi is present and the words are exact, they're precise. And when you live in such a way, then you don't have to have long discussions. You can do and accomplish so much more. So let your soul express itself.